Here we go. Okay. Where's my share? All right. Well, that's the wrong camera, but that's okay. We'll just go ahead and deal with it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to OCIA. So today, as we were kind of going, the 10 Commandments. So today we're going to be talking about commandment as well as Lent. I figured since next week is kind of some big topics, the next few sessions we're going to have are rather broad in kind of what we discuss. Not to say the fourth commandment isn't. There actually is like a lot more there discussed than we may think. The opportunity to kind of talk about Lent too, as we're kind of going into Lent, starting in only a week and a half. That's kind of crazy to think about, right? So let's begin. This comes from Exodus 20, verse 12. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So I was really debating whether I was going to use, again, the 10 Commandments for this, because I mean, it's only one commandment. It's very small scripture when it comes to Exodus 20, or use the gospel where the rich young man approaches Jesus and says, "What must I do to achieve eternal life?" Right? And Jesus responds, "Well, follow the commandments, honor your father and mother, do not steal, do not kill." And the young man responds, "Well, I've done all these things," right? And so Jesus then tells him, "Well, give everything you have to the poor, and then come follow me," right? I think that's also an understanding of just, there's many different instances where, Jesus kind of challenged in the moral law. Like, he's also asked about from the Pharisees, which law is the greatest? Well, that was actually a game that a lot of rabbis used to play back then. It's almost like the St. Louis question, what high school did you go to? It kind of reveals something about the person by saying what the greatest law is. And Jesus kind of like sums everything up with love your God and love your neighbor as yourself. In the same way, that's what the Decalogue, that's what the 10 Commandments directed to. The first 3 commands we talked about last week were directed towards our relationship with God, to put him first, to honor him with our speech, and to actually worship him every week. Now we're getting into more how we relate to each other. And it's rather interesting that the 4th commandment is really probably the most intimate human relationship that we actually have, right? That's the most primary relationship that we have. So it's rather interesting that even the way that's structured, where God gives us to Moses, it really kind of relates to our human interaction, our human experience. So I was thinking about using those, but I think, just going straight to the source is always a good thing too. So I know it's short. I know there's not a lot of context, but any fruits that the Holy Spirit has prompted us to share in the scripture. Pretty simple, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
And I think, though, it also reminds me that it doesn't just include your mom and dad, it includes all people who, and what, I feel like elderly, like just include all people that are older and wiser.
And we'll be talking about that. Yeah, I mean, so on the surface, that seems rather, pretty simple, right? Our father and mother, we should just honor them. And we'll talk about exactly what that means, because the way we honor our parents when we're young is certainly different the way we honor our parents when we get older, as they get older. But also, too, just, this aspect of, is it just the parents, right? Does that expand to anyone else? And the short answer is yes. We'll talk about that, sure. Yeah, right. Great. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns, heresies? Wonderful. All right. Well, let's go and then jump into lesson here today. So let me bring this up on the share. Okay. Come on. And if all right. The 4th commandment, I mean, it seems rather simple on the surface, but like I said, it's this is sort of like this introduction to this relationship with each other, right? So we love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, we learn how to love really from our parents, right? We learn how to interact with each other from our parents, and whether that's good or bad. It's funny, my sister, when she was had my niece, her second child, she was really struggling because it seemed like this is like preschool, like she was determining like was she like bump her up to kindergarten or not. And she was talking to all these people, and they were advising her, that's probably not a good idea. I mean, even though she might be very smart, a lot of the teachers and the principals, like, we've never seen someone. We've seen people fail more than we've seen people succeed in actually having children come in to kindergarten early. And so, it's probably best to do that. But she was really so scrutinizing. And she came to me and said, "Well, what should I do?" And I said, "Well, what do you think you should do?" She's like, "I just don't want to screw her up." And my response to her was, "You're going to do that regardless, right? Because you're fallen, and we're all fallen. And the things that we do, how we act around our children, they are like sponges. They're going to take the good and the bad, right? So just follow your heart, follow what God wants for you, and be fine, right?" And she did. I think she made the right decision. in that regard. So I think it also gave her a little bit of solace because, I think we can put ourselves, especially as parents, put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And it's not that we shouldn't. It's just that sometimes, though, we have to understand that, well, who we are kind of comes across in who our children are too. It's important to keep that in mind. So what does it mean then to honor, right? Well, as a child, that would kind of mean obedience, right? So obedience, I owe obedience to my parents because of all the things they give me. But obedience is an act of justice, as we talk about the virtues, right? That flows from the cardinal virtue of justice, giving to one what one is due. And our parents do deserve that honor, that obedience, especially when we were younger. But we also understand, too, that obedience is not just an act of justice, it's also an act of faith and charity. So blind obedience is not something that we actually want to do, right? That can actually get us into trouble. But parents would be primary in this trust, meaning that they would be the ones where we actually first learn how to trust. Because underlying this is that our parents have our best interest at heart, right? They really want the best for us. They're going to do everything they can to provide for that. But what does it mean if that's not present? Are there families, are there parents that don't will the good for their children? I mean, that's hard to kind of maybe discuss in our society, but it becomes kind of more prevalent sometimes too. That there are parents that maybe don't love their, they may love their children, but maybe they don't necessarily have their best interests, right? So if parents will evil for children, is obedience, honor still given? What do we think about that? Do we still owe obedience and honor to our parents if they don't have our best interests at heart?
I think you owe charity, but I would say as a parent, I can't imagine any parent actually willing evil for them. Do they do evil? Probably.
Mhm.
Is it intentional? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably from how they were raised or what they were taught, or if it's a mental illness.
Yeah.
So I would go as far as to say that I would think that every parent would want the best for their kids.
Yeah, I think that conversation becomes into play, especially when we talk about like disciplining children, right? Because there's a lot of different theories out there about how best to discipline a child, right? And the kind of the aspect of that is that they're all valid in some way, right? And they're all based on maybe, how a person's raised. And again, when we talk about like even something like, in my day, and maybe many of our days, spanking was still kind of a thing, right? That was not uncommon. And so it wasn't understood as an act of like evil because the parents' intention wasn't to actually bring evil upon their child. It was to correct them. In many ways, that's kind of like Jesus in the temple. Not to say that parents aren't angry, right? I mean, that's certainly something that you would experience when your child does something wrong. But that anger was more of a righteous anger than maybe a malicious anger. Now, maybe there's a fine line between that, right? There's a fine line between I love you and want the best things for you. You're not doing that, and here's the only way I can show you what's right. And boy, you really ticked me off, and I want to get revenge on you. So one is actually virtuous, the same like Jesus had in the temple. The other one, we might want to shy away from. And again, that line might be a little different, but still, even in that regard, let's say it's more malicious. Does a child still owe obedience and honor to their parents, even in those circumstances? The old adage I tend to use with the kids is, okay, what if your parent told you to go jump off the Eads Bridge? Would you be bound by the fourth commandment to do that? No, right? Because that's not in your best interest. And maybe you could ask, like, what's going on there? Why is my dad asked me to jump off the Eads Bridge? Is he meaning that like jokingly? Or is there actually like a seriousness behind it? In that regard, is there some kind of like mental lapse that's going on with that? Like, so we are given this intellect to discern well whether something is actually legitimate or not. But even in that regard, we still owe them honor, right? And the reason being is because St. Thomas Aquinas talks about there are kind of three groups that we cannot give justice back to. The first one, of course, is God. We kind of talked about that, right, in previous discussions. Parents, though, are number two. We can never actually give back to our parents everything they've given us because at minimum, we would say that our parents gave us life. which we can never repay them for that, right? Yet there are limitations to that obedience, as we're kind of discussing. So if my dad told me, if I was a child, my dad told me, I want you to go jump off the East Bridge, and meant it, I am not obligated to actually follow that, because that's not my good. That's not for my good or for his, right? He's just as liable as I would be if I were to do that. And so in charity, I can say, yeah, I shouldn't do that. And maybe even try to find resources for my dad to help him in that regard, right? Now the third is rather interesting. Any questions about honoring? So as we grow older, though, that tends to change from obedience to more of one of a peer with our parents. And we'll talk about that in a second. So are there any questions about that? Maybe just to finish that thought. As we mature, honor is still owed to our parents, but it's more as a peer than like a power dynamic, right? So even though as we maybe live in our parents' house, as we grow older, that dynamic may still change. We still owe them obedience in the fact that we're still living in their house, they're still maybe providing things for us, but we can honor them in a different way as we grow older, primarily, especially as they get older too, in taking care of their needs as they decline physically. Right? We still owe that honor. We still owe that respect to them in that regard. Yeah. Questions about parents then? How that relates?
With children showing that, they say it right. Honor and obedience. I think you see that even in like abusive situations where our children that are like in foster things. I mean, they are loyal to their mom and dad, and they want them back, and they forgive them, and they, it's really strong. It's a bond that's very strong.
Yeah, Karen, I'm glad you brought that up, because like even also too, we tend to see that with even the parents that bring the children into their home, like foster, not necessarily the natural parents, but even the foster parents, right? So obviously the fourth commandment would still apply to them, because hey, I'm giving you sustenance, I'm giving you means, I'm giving you things you can't necessarily repay me back to, right? But also too, our natural parents that give our children up for adoption, they still are owed that honor as well. Because again, at minimum, I gave you life. Maybe I couldn't provide a good life for you, but I gave you that. And that can be kind of hard, because there are these traumas, these abandonments that kind of come in play there that can affect that relationship, and even affect that seeing that good that our parents, natural or a foster, kind of give us. I mean, my cousin right now is actually fostering a child. And it's very interesting. They were fostering because they were struggling with some fertility issues. And now she's pregnant. So it's actually interesting how that kind of happens too. But still, this child is still loved and wanted and desired, and is given a life. That. So in some ways, it's almost more of a struggle, as you honor to two different parents instead of just one, right? But still, we still owe that honor and that respect.
Yeah, I think it changes from when you're younger, obedience, to when you're older, honor.
Yeah.
And gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think that as you get older, you're able to honor them in a more grateful way for what they've given you.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very odd if, let's say, you're living on your own, have your own place, paying your own bills, and then your dad or your mom comes over and tells you to clean your room. Okay. So in that regard, I don't have to do that, Mom. This is my stuff. I pay for it. I kind of, it's kind of my decision. Now, granted, can I maybe show good manners or be good hospitality by make sure things are clean, whatever? Sure. And I can take that into consideration, Mom, for that and that purpose, right? And I should, as honoring my mother. But do I have to do that? No.
Respect if I close the door.
Right. I mean, so in other words, as we grow older, that dynamic does kind of change, but we still have to honor our parents by taking at least their opinion in consideration. Doesn't mean we necessarily have to agree with them. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to do what they tell us, but we should still respect them and honor them in the fact that, well, you may be a little wiser than I am too, right? And maybe that goes into the final discussion here. So, what before we get into that, the third aspect that Thomas talks about is the state. So Thomas says we can never repay the country the government, the whatever that we're born into for providing the things that we have, namely like protection, laws, these other things that kind of make the society function. And are there limitations to that? What do we think? I think there are, right? So in other words, if a law that is put into practice by a government, king, whatever, is contrary to my conscience or contrary to my faith or even contrary to my personhood,
Like I can only have one kid.
right? That's something that we would say we don't have an obligation to follow, right? Because of the moral aspect that it has. Now, that's maybe different than allowances that the government has. So in other words, governments may allow certain evils. And maybe there's a purpose behind that too, right? And maybe a purpose that we don't necessarily see right away. But the question is that particular law infringing upon me personally? Meaning, is it causing harm to me or to anyone, right? So even in our own country, there are certain laws that we as Catholics say, that's probably not really good, that we should, follow those things or even have an allowance for them. And that doesn't say we should take up arms against the government because of those. But there are instances where maybe we should. So if there's like a law that says, anyone with a mental defect should be put to death. Ooh, well, you know what? That's not good. And maybe that might raise the level of we need to maybe find a new form of government. Now we can do that. We always want to do that peacefully. And we'll talk about the fifth commandment next week. We always want to do that in the best way possible. But is it ever justifiable morally then to actually overthrow, even by force, a government? Yeah. What's that? Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, and even that was even like less moral. You have to pay a few more taxes. All right. Well, whatever, so yeah, in that regard, yeah. We've had new governments for less. Well, primarily it's how it kind of started, right? But primarily, yeah, we look at like how governments kind of start, and there's governments start for much less than these moral things. So, but we would even say in that regard, yeah, it should be more of an issue against our conscience or our psyche, against our physical good well-being, that there could be justification to overthrow a government and establish a new one. Right? Now, obviously, those would probably be few and far between where those instances would happen, hopefully. But you see things like maybe Nazi Germany. Again, a lot of this is based on perception. A lot of this is based on, I don't necessarily know what's going on, right? Which is, as Americans, which we have probably even a greater responsibility because we do have a say in who leads our country. And so in that regard, is it immoral to not vote? Do we not show due honor and respect to the country if we do not vote? And I think as Americans, the struggle is we often find ourselves in the limitation of the lesser of two evils, not necessarily the good, right? And that's rather unfortunate that usually the situation we find ourselves in, which is the least evil thing I could actually choose here. And that's really what the church kind of teaches on that. You do the best you can in the circumstance we find ourselves. But to not vote would also be not showing due respect to the state, which provides things for you. And especially if you have a say in how that state functions, you have even more responsibility on actually doing those things. Now, is it ever morally justified not to vote at all? Well, there can be limitations to that too. So if you have, let's say, I don't know, a cannibal and a pagan, I don't know. That's gonna be kind of hard to do if your candidates are so corrupt and evil. that there really is no good choice. Sure. That can be justified.
The only problem with that is in the United States, you can write in.
That's very true. That's true, Don. That's a good point. Which you can do that as well. Yeah. I mean, sorry, provided that's not there though, sure. You would probably be morally justified not to do that. But in the United States for sure. Right.
When I get to the part of the ballot that has all the judges on it, I don't know what to be able to say.
Well, there's a website you can go to.
Well, I suppose there is.
Yeah, it definitely give you that.
Yeah.
It always help.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes, how much should we do and how much can we do? I mean, if we're spending our entire day and week, like researching candidates and see what their backgrounds are, well, that could be a full-time job in itself, right? And so is that really prudent? Yeah, so.
I skip over those because I could be believe that's somebody
Yeah.
that really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
No, I think
That's fair, yeah.
Just have to know somebody who works in that area, like, okay, anyone you want out? Okay, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Done that too.
And again, when it comes to government, the assumption there is that they also have our best interests at heart too, right? So that really is kind of the underlying function here when it comes to the fourth commandment. Any other thoughts, comments, questions about that? Okay. So others to whom we owe honor, obedience, church officials, clergy, maybe in the social order, our bosses. We owe them honor. As we mentioned, elders. In general, yeah. Again, provided that they're trying to uphold the good, trying to maintain our best interests, yeah, we would definitely owe them that. I mean, elderly people, you'd say, well, their wisdom is a great benefit to society, and we should honor that, right? I mean, today I think we've gotten into a habit, so to speak, of, well, my children are mine or my people are mine, and you don't have any say in how things go. Yeah, that's I mean, in general, that's probably true, but also, if we see an elderly person down the street, provided they still have their faculties, we do owe them still honor. If anything, just acknowledging them, right? Now there can be a level of prudence involved with that too, right? I mean, so. It's not that we should go up to strangers or even children go up to strangers and start grabbing their hands and interacting. There's still evil in the world. There's a level of prudence involved with a lot of these things. But in general, we would still owe them that honor and respect. Veterans, obviously that would be another one maybe. Any others?
I think everyone deserves respect.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a relationship between older and younger though, too. I mean, so in other words, yeah, I mean, should I respect a younger person in the same way I respect an older person? Maybe it's not the same way, but definitely respect should be given because of the dignity of the human person. We certainly say that for sure. Kathy, you're about to say something?
Well, sometimes with bosses, if you know a boss is really doing something wrong,
Well, good. And that kind of goes into the
you don't
next.
just go around saying, well, he's the boss.
Yeah,
You should honor
yeah.
him. But I mean, if and a lot of companies now have something in place with some
Sure.
warning and all that.
Sure. Well, and I think it was the next question that we're talking about here is, what does it mean to have proper authority, right? So in general, authority, we understand, is actually a gift from God. And so we trust, people are put in certain situations, God may will it for some reason, which we may not necessarily know what it is at the time. But there is a level of respect even due to somebody who's even maybe not necessarily doing the best things, right? Just because, well, they do have some say in what's happening here, and I'm going to trust more in God than this person, and trust that there's some reason it's going to be happening here. But again, how do we know? That becomes more of a level of discernment than really maybe a moral choice. So yeah, I think like you're saying, Kathy, if I know my boss is embezzling money, and also maybe trying to engage with his subordinates and something that's illicit and immoral, do I owe them respect? Well, no. Do I still have to do what they tell me? Maybe, because I still have to maintain a job. I still have to maintain a sustenance for my family. And in that regard, I'll do this, but I won't I won't necessarily like engage in the things that are against my conscience, because if my boss has asked me to do something that's against my moral, rightly ordered conscience, I have an obligation to say no.
Yeah, but I think that in that situation, I would say you don't have to respect them.
No.
You have to show them respect.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between if you know someone is being dishonorable in their job, like a boss was said. I would think that you wouldn't have to respect them as a human being in your own mind.
Yeah.
But you have to show them.
Yeah, if anything, acknowledgement they're made in God's image and likeness, and they have that. Yes, but again, yeah, but have that. I wouldn't go out to dinner with them. You know, maintain a relationship with that. Like, yeah, right, yeah. Well, right, yeah. So again, I mean, I think there are limitations to that too. So yeah, I think that's true.
The way that's put where I used to work was you respect the position.
Yeah.
Not the
Necessarily.
man,
Yeah.
woman.
And I think that's the same for any of these things, right? I mean, you see it in the military, right? You expect the rank, not the person.
But if there's wrong going on, it doesn't mean you can't take the appropriate channels to take care of it. You just don't do it yourself.
Right. And so in that regard, the question is how much control do I have in the situation? Right. So yeah, you always have to take that into consideration. Yeah.
And how much will that cost me?
So as we see, the fourth commandment is rather expansive. It's not just our parents. There's other people, especially those, well, as we were saying, everyone kind of is owed dignity. And that's what the fourth commandment is directed to. We learned that primarily from our parents. But this proper authority is always kind of a question. I think it goes back to the fact that, you know, the church is always, this is really well known. The church has always had this understanding of separation of church and state. Since about the 4th century, when Christianity was actually made legal, also almost immediately there was kind of to put this test about where is the limitations of those things, right? Many people would say, well, you know, the first ecumenical council was called by Constantine. No, it wasn't. Constantine provided maybe the rooms for the bishop, maybe provide protection for the bishop. They traveled, did all these things, even provide the space where the council happened. But he didn't call it. It was Sylvester the First that called the first ecumenical council, right? Because there's a limitation what the secular order can do, what the religious order can do. People will say, well, wait a minute, didn't the church run a lot of things in the Middle Ages? Yeah, she did. And the reason that happens is because there was a power vacuum. The fall of Rome kind of started happening around the 4th century, where the capital was moved from Rome to Constantinople. And after that, Rome was being sacked by Visigoths and Goths and all these other Vandals, all these other tribal nations that were run by warlords. But there was the only authority that was really around. Because when the Roman Empire kind of collapsed, well, who do we have to kind of pick up the pieces? Well, the church is here. And the church built these monasteries and they built these kind of fortifications. And so, well, that seems to be a place of stability. So people tend to start, you know, find their way around there. One of the reasons we have such great cities in Europe and across the world is because, well, it just happened there was a monastery built in that place. And that was the best place for protection when the Vikings and these other, you know, people started trying to come in and pillage. Well, the monastery has these great walls and heavy doors. Let's go there. And towns started to build up around those. But even within that, the church never necessarily wanted that responsibility to govern, because that wasn't her purpose. It just so happened it was kind of thrust upon her. And it stayed that way for about 300 years, when finally Charlemagne came about and was kind of the first Christian king who provided protection for Rome. But that even happened, it happened over and over again, you know.
The church takes a bad rap.
It does.
Over the Middle Ages, because when you really look back in history, you begin to realize that, as an example, the Inquisition. I mean, everybody thinks the Catholic Church caused that. Well, it was the secular government,
Spanish royalty, yeah,
who
primarily.
were doing things in the name of the church.
Well, they were enacting laws that were, so here's the thing, right? When you think about these laws that are made, well, in these Christian kings and queens are coming into power, and they're trying to make laws that are in accord with Christian teaching. And so what tended to happen was, well, okay, if you say that Jesus Christ is not God, that's illegal. And not only is it illegal, but it's actually a capital crime. It's a crime against the crown. And so if you commit a capital crime, what's the punishment? Death. Well, what the Inquisition was established to actually save life. It was actually trying to put the royalty in check and say, well, hold on, wait a minute. You don't really have a theological background to make these determinations. And so what the Inquisition did was a group of theologians, priests, that would inquire to the subject and say, well, okay, do you understand like what you're saying? Or, I'm Jewish. Okay, well, yeah, you have no obligation to believe this, so fine, right? But even those instances where the church said, well, yeah, that's actually heretical, you shouldn't do that. It wasn't the church putting anyone to death, it was the state.
And
So-
in fact, people would tend to want to go to the church inquisitors as opposed to the government.
Yeah.
Because they tended to be a lot more lenient.
As a matter of fact, we still have the Inquisition today. It's called the DDF, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. So, I mean, again, it's not the same way, but that's where the DDF came from. Theologians looking at these theological aspects, saying that seems to be in line, that doesn't, and that's all she really does. Even the Crusades were also kind of one of these things were also misunderstood, in the fact that the Crusades actually actually started as a pilgrimage. It was actually a way to defend Jerusalem from the oncoming slaughter from a warring nation. And the pilgrimage would just so happen to be controlled by these people that were hostile. And so, as a pilgrim, you have a right to defend yourself. Maybe even bring an army with you to help defend yourself. And so, it's actually interesting that the only real successful crusade was the first one. The other ones kind of failed. The problem was they weren't necessarily directed towards that. They became directed by other things that were led by the secular people that were leading them. As a matter of fact, most of the crusades got condemned by the church because that wasn't the purpose. You guys did something else. And we'll talk about just war next week. So it'd be interesting to talk about that too. Questions, comments, concerns, heresies then about the fourth commandment? Great. So in relation to the speech of obedience, it's fitting that we talk about Lent. So Lent starts on Ash Wednesday and ends on Holy Thursday. So Ash Wednesday this year is a week and a half away. It's February 18th. It ends on right at the Mass of Holy Thursday on Holy Thursday night. And then another season starts, Triduum. We'll actually talk about that more at our retreat, which is coming up on Palm Sunday. But Ash Wednesday, there are some traditions that happen about that, but more properly speaking, when we talk about the moral obligation, we look at the tenets of the faith. We talked about many of these. These are also grave matter, which can and should be confessed if they're violated, right? So fasting. There are 2 days in Lent that we're called to fast, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Meaning 1 large meal and or 2 small meals. What does that mean, right? In some ways, it's kind of up to individual conscience. So like if you were to, let's say, eat at a breakfast buffet every day, right? Maybe a small meal for me in that instance is instead of having, well, I couldn't have bacon because we can't have bacon, but maybe I have just a plate of eggs and a piece of fruit. Usually I might have toast, bacon, sausage, I don't know, maybe a Danish, I don't know, right? But I reduce that to just maybe a plate of eggs and a piece of fruit. That's a small meal. Maybe for lunch, I'll have a salad. Usually I might have a BLT, or, maybe if not meat, maybe I'll have a cheese pizza, I don't know, whatever. And then for dinner, I might have a little bit bigger meal. Maybe I'll have, shrimp basket, some fries. I don't know, right? So in other words, it's like what is kind of compared to what you would usually eat in a day. Now, some may argue, wait, is that really fasting, Father? Right? I mean, doesn't fasting mean kind of cut off food completely? It can. And if you can, fine, right? The church doesn't put these limitations because what it's looking at is more what's more commonality for people to do. And so even limitations of that, let's say I'm a diabetic, or let's say, I don't know, I have some deficiency, which I need to actually maintain a calorie intake. Fine, right? You'd be exempt in that regard too. What's rather interesting though, is actually is also age limitations to this. So here in the United States, in most dioceses, fasting is reserved for those between the ages of 18 and 59. Now, that seems rather arbitrary, doesn't it, in some ways? Because like when I was growing up, it was actually 13 to 59. And when it came to the next aspect of the tenet of the faith, abstaining from meat regardless of penance on Fridays. Now, every Friday we should abstain from meat unless we do some other form of penance, but Fridays of Lent specifically, we are called, regardless of what penance we do on Friday, to abstain from meat. But there are limitations on that. That's from the age of 13 on. There's no end to that. But when I was growing up, there wasn't a bottom. It was once you can eat meat, you stop eating meat on those Fridays. Why? Or who maybe can actually have the authority to put the limitations on that? The local bishop. And it seems here in St. Louis, the Archbishop has said, or at least in the United States, the OCCP has said, this seems reasonable to do. But health should also be upheld. And if there are health issues, that can also be exempted as well.
It always cracks me up on the fish fry. I eat more of the fish fry than I eat.
That's okay. That's a great point. I mean, so
I didn't know fry food, so I eat.
yeah, no, I mean, that's great. That's actually a really great point, Kathy, because like we can say like with these days of absence, well, maybe not on, there's not necessarily days of fasting on these Fridays of Lent, but I mean, can I do that personally? Sure. And again, that kind of comes down to your own personal, maybe offertory or personal penance. So if you want to say, you know what, I come to the fish fry, that's the only meal I'm going to have that day. Fine. Now notice we don't have fish fries on Good Friday or Ash Wednesday. That's probably for a reason. I mean,
Friday, a lot of churches have a mass.
well, no, actually, Good Friday is the only day we don't have mass. We do have the service though. But no, I mean, it's really because it's a day of fasting. It's really supposed to be directed towards that, right? And other parishes do have fish fries on Friday. And okay, I'm not going to judge that. But, I think there's an aspect of like, well, okay, are we really promoting this tenet of the faith by doing that? And I think that's actually a personal decision, right? It kind of comes down to that. Fine. I mean, that kind of goes into these other kind of traditions we have during Lent. And we'll get to that in a second. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, this abstaining from meat, though, why do we do that? Does anyone know?
The sacrifice.
Okay. Well, I can't. Okay, let's put it this way. Okay, so instead of eating a juicy steak on Friday of Lent, I'll just have a nice lobster tail, buttery lobster tail, maybe a little, maybe a little shark steak. I don't know, whatever you got. Is that really showing the sacrifice?
I think fasting and all that is supposed to, whatever you do, you're supposed to have a longing for God.
Okay. But again, I mean, we see the spirit of law compared to the letter of the law. And I guess I'm really focusing more, why does the letter of the law say fish or no meat, especially? It actually has to do with a historical tradition. So meat, up until really recently, let's say within the last 100 years or so, maybe even like 60, 70 years, meat has always been a delicacy. It's actually been reserved more for those who could afford those type of things. Meat has always been sort of like, hey, that shows you have some wealth. You're kind of rich. If you eat meat, that's kind of a special occasion, right? So by actually promoting this aspect of no meat on Fridays, what it actually promotes is this level of commonality, right? It kind of brings the rich down to the level of those who can't afford it, and also kind of elevates the dignity of the poor to be more in line with the rich. Because here's the thing, anyone can fish. Fish is a common food. People can do that, right? Bread is a common food. Let's take the fish out of it. Okay, bread is something everyone can eat. Everyone can make bread, right? But meat, well, that's kind of a higher echelon. And so it just so happens also too that in the Renaissance era, because of this vacuum of power, the church found herself owning a lot of land and also a lot of ports. And many cynics would say, see, this was a money grab by the church to actually promote fish selling so that she can make money. Well, you can say that, and that's not to say that maybe there weren't abuses by certain people. I'm not going to say that. But in general, people buying fish from these ports or the selling of fish in these ports wasn't really lining the pockets of the Pope or the bishops. Primarily, many of it was going to help the poor, help those, and provide the mission of the church. Again, not to say there weren't abuses, because obviously that happens, right? But in general, that was the reason behind the abstaining from meat on Fridays, was to say, okay, look, let's have a common meal that everyone can actually partake in. Especially we're commemorating the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And so in that regard, as we're talking about, okay, well, let's have a nice lobster tail or, whatever on Fridays. Okay, but are you really kind of engaging in that in a way that's proper? Again, maybe not sinful, but maybe we should reconsider what we're doing on that day and who we're actually commemorating this towards. Make sense? So there are other things, like for instance, also this is a time where, as one of the tenets of faith, we should, as Catholics, at minimum, receive the sacrament of reconciliation once a year and the sacrament of the Eucharist at least once a year. And usually the church recommends Lent, Easter are the time to kind of do this because of the nature of the seasons. But again, as long as you do it once a year, it's fine. Now, there are other traditions which we'll kind of get into, which are not obligatory, but help to receive in a deeper spiritual way the season leading to the glory of Easter. So one of those may be, I'm going to either give something up or do something extra during this time of Lent. That is not obligatory, right? It's up to you to determine what that might be for you. Okay? So like you're talking about like the fish fries and stuff. Well, maybe I'm going to only I won't have dessert on those fish fry days. Maybe I'll only have like one beer instead of maybe two. Okay. That really can be anything that you determine, which will be good. But here's the thing. Who is the arbiter of that? So let's say, I don't know, Greg says, I'm going to give up chocolate for Lent. And some random Wednesday, he's over here at St. Anne, he's chewing on a chocolate bar, and I'm like, hey, Greg, didn't you give up chocolate? What's going on there? Right? Is that my job? No, because usually I don't know what you're doing anyway, right? And actually, that's probably good. As one of these things we probably do want, not necessarily amplify it, actually want to more keep to ourselves, right? Because we're actually going to hear on Ash Wednesday this gospel where Jesus tells us to, when we pray, lock the door, right? Don't let anyone else see. When we give alms, don't let your left hand know what your right is doing. When you're fasting, don't look like you're fasting. These are things that are internal, not external, right? And so maybe it's not necessarily good that I go around telling people, I gave up soda for Lent or whatever. That might come up, but it should be also an issue of pride, because also, what if I fail in it? So a little advice in that regard. It's always good to do something that is actually practically I can do or can't, or give up something I can practically give up reasonably. And also be reasonable and discerning in what the limitation of that is. So back to Greg and his chocolate bar on Wednesday. Can Greg then say, you know what, I'm going to have a chocolate except for Wednesdays? Can he do that? Yeah, sure. That's his call. Now here's another question. If I were to violate that, would that be matter for the sacrament of confession? Not necessarily.
I mean, which ones? The ones you put on yourself or the fasting?
Well, the one you put on yourself. So if I give, let's say I give chocolate for Lent, and oh man, it's Tuesday afternoon, and I really need a chocolate bar, and I know I gave it up, but oh boy, I just can't go through the rest of this day without having a Hershey.
Well, then you can start again the next day.
You could,
Or the next hour.
but if you were to say, if let's say you didn't have Tuesday as your day you gave it up, and you eat it on Tuesday, does that matter for the sacrament? Can it be?
Could be, but it's self-imposed.
It is, yeah, but self-imposed, maybe not. Now, that may be different is if I make a vow to God or a vow to somebody else. Am I violating that vow?
Yes.
And that goes more with the 8th commandment. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the 8th commandment. But it can be. It depends on what the direction is, right?
So if you were to eat meat on Wednesday or Good Friday,
That's definitely matter for the sacrament, right? Yeah. So again, and there's also different kind between, okay, let's say it's the Friday right after Ash Wednesday. And let's say, I don't know, before you go to classes or school, let's say you're in high school, and it just so happens you get in this habit with your friends, you drop off McDonald's and grab an egg McMuffin, a sausage egg McMuffin. And it's Friday after Ash Wednesday, you're in the line, you get the sausage egg McMuffin, you pop in your mouth, you get halfway through and you're like, wait a minute, it's a Friday in Lent. Now what?
Well, you don't finish eating the sandwich, A.
Well, so I mean, that'd be, if you can, fine. If you let it go to waste, I don't know. Maybe you can wrap it up and save it for the next day, maybe Saturday,
Take off the sausage.
whatever. Do the best you can, right? Should you confess that though?
I don't know, but I think that for lunch, you should not have meat. I mean,
Sure.
It's not like you could say, oh, I already messed up on
Right.
breakfast,
Sure.
so I might as
Right.
well have it. Then
Right.
then it's a willing thing.
Right.
We just forgot, so
Right.
I don't think that's matters for the confession.
Well, okay, here's the thing, right? In the fact that it's an objective thing that the church professes, it would be grave matter.
Intentionally, you forgot.
Well, okay, regardless though. So it's still grave matter. And if there's any ambiguity, I would. But yeah, you could also say, well, I forgot and maybe I'm just going to I'll do it for Saturday. I'll transfer it maybe. Okay. Or do another day next week. Okay. Fine. Again, we want to be kind of discerning in this. But as far as grave matter is concerned, that would be grave matter. So the same thing if I stubbed my toe and a bad word came out. I didn't necessarily think about that just happened. I maybe did accidentally. Okay. Still grave matter. Right? So definitely not a mortal sin. We wouldn't go as far as saying that is concerned. But it may be venial. Maybe.
Which wouldn't necessarily be for the confession.
Correct. If you receive the Eucharist or, do some other, yeah, that's true.
Well, some priests
Yeah.
say there are worse things.
Oh, I agree. For sure. For sure. I mean, we're talking about grave matter here though, right? That's what we're actually talking. These are objective things that we can say if we violated them, that could be matter for the confessional. Right?
I do think it goes back to intention. Like, if you forgot, or if you forgot at breakfast and you intentionally ate at lunch or dinner, then definitely, because you took it to, I know that today is Friday, and I'm consciously making the decision to eat meat because I already screwed up the breakfast.
And I would say, I mean, again, if there's ambiguity there, just take it to the confessional. That's the best thing to do. But yeah, I mean, but are there situations where you can say, oh, you know what, I forgot, but I'm going to do it tomorrow or do it sometime. Okay, fine. Sure.
You just have to remember the three things that make it mortal.
Right.
Grave matter, consent of the will, and knowing that
Right.
it's a sin.
Right.
So if you're doing it without thinking,
Yeah, exactly. For sure. But yeah, if you're like, I don't care if it's Friday and I'm going to have this Egg McMuffin.
my thoughts was that if it bothers your conscience about it, take it to the
I think it's always a good rule of thumb. For sure. Yeah. So again, at the root of this giving up or doing something really is these tenets of Lent, which is called prayer, fasting, almsgiving. We're always supposed to do that all the time. But Lent is really kind of a way we emphasize that during that season. So when you're actually discerning this, if you're discerning it, if you want to do it or not, it's again up to you. It's always made it kind of directed towards these three aspects. And there's many recommendations for that, right? I mean, again, I think part of it is actually understanding like what your own limitations are. So, for instance, if you want to give up caffeine for Lent, but you're going to be an ogre in the morning if you don't get a cup of coffee, well, then don't give up caffeine for Lent. You know, if it's going to affect other people in your relationship with others, that needs to be discerned too. Right, you're exactly right. So maybe that might be, I'm only going to have one cup of coffee the entire day. Okay, awesome, great. But sometimes I think we get to these extremes. I'm just going to give this up cold turkey. Is that reasonable and is that practical and can you do it? You know, it wants to be challenging, but it also shouldn't be like I'm actually hurting people around me by doing this. And if I just can't be around people unless I have some caffeine in me, well, then fine. Have a cup of coffee, right? Your thoughts, comments, concerns, heresies in regard to that? Any recommendations? Anyone else find techniques that work in doing these things when it comes to these personal traditions or personal sacrifices? I will say I always find it also helpful that I not necessarily do these things for myself, but I actually do them for other people. So, you know, if I know if someone's going through some struggle, maybe during this time, maybe I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to fast for these next several days or whatever for them, for their intention, for their good.
And I would think going back to the chocolate bar, if you really like are wrestling with yourself that you needed it, that would be an opportunity for prayer, because if it's whatever you give up is supposed to be bringing you closer to Jesus. So then when you're struggling and you really want it, then you take it to prayer, and maybe that will make you think about it less, and you can get through the rest of the day without your chocolate bar.
Yeah.
You know, everybody thinks about giving up stuff, but you can flip it.
Yeah.
And you can say, okay, I'm going to give up some time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pray every day for the souls in purgatory.
Right.
Or I'm going to pray for people that I know need stuff. So yeah, I'm sacrificing my time, but that needs that.
I mean, even going along with that too. I mean, we also help run a pantry over at St. Rita, and on Wednesday afternoons, our Vincent Paul goes over there and helps. Maybe I can, I'll go down there for a little while, or I can volunteer maybe at St. Peter and Paul in the soup kitchen, or at St. Vincent de Paul. Okay, it's like maybe an hour on a night, 2 hours a night, maybe an hour in the afternoon. Yeah. I mean, again, it's not necessarily what you give up. It could be also what you do, for sure.
Because you can pray for the people that give up chocolate.
That's right. Yeah. No, but I mean, again, it's not that we shouldn't be doing these things always. We should be doing them always. But also, Lent is kind of a way for us to actually level set. And I think an indication of how fruitful that is if we keep it going. So, if on Easter Sunday, it comes around, you're like, or let's say maybe Holy Saturday, depending on when you stop doing these things, right? Because technically, again, Lent starts on Holy Thursday. We enter into the Triduum, which is another season of sacrifice. We'll talk about that. But if we get to Easter Sunday or Holy Saturday, you're like, I'm just going to gorge myself on whatever I gave up. Maybe that wasn't really the best thing to give up, right? Maybe there was an indication, maybe I should have done something different. Not to say there can't be fruits from that. There can be. But we also want to be discerning in those things too. And maybe the next year I'm like, maybe I'll do a little better on that. Or maybe I'll start something different now. Easter is not necessarily a time for that. Easter is more of a glory time, right? But again, I think we can be discerning in that too. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns, heresies? All right. Well, I guess we'll see you for rite of sending. And just so we're all aware, what's going to happen, the profession of faith, right? And after that, I'm going to call everyone up one by one with their sponsors if they're here. We'll have sort of a dialogue with the community and the sponsors, and then give a blessing, and then everyone just sits down. It's very short. It's pretty. And then actually, we'll stay up there also for the petitions, because the petition will be directed towards our candidates and catechumens.
So when you say you're calling everyone up, you're calling
Just the candidates and catechumens and their sponsors.
So we, the catechumens, can stay.
Yes, right. Any questions about that? All right. We'll see everyone upstairs then. Thanks for coming.
Sorry.